The first whisper started like static, just a name, a rumor edged with anger. Then it became a chorus. She did what? Did you hear what she fined Mrs. Alvarez for? They threatened to tow the food truck from Maine just for being late. By the end of the week, the whole town was talking about one person, the HOA president, and nobody was surprised when the whisper turned into a march. When I moved here, I thought I'd found the kind of place where people waved from porches and kids left bikes out without fear. A place with a farmer's market on Saturdays, a high school football team the entire town cheered for, and a diner whose coffee tasted like home. We had traditions, and we had neighbors. But somewhere along the line, someone decided community meant control, and that someone was our HOA president. At first, it was small things. The kind of petty policing that makes for annoyed eye rolls and muttered complaints. A $50 fine for a garage left open too long. A warning notice for non-conforming landscaping that meant Mr. Thompson's vegetable beds had to go. A policy update that made it a crime on paper to hang laundry in your backyard unless you used approved clips. The board called them standards, we called them rules designed to make people obey. Then the tone changed. It wasn't rules anymore. It was personal. The president began targeting local businesses' fines for a neon sign, a demand that the food truck change its menu, font, or be ticketed. She sent security to school events, measuring the height of homemade posters for violation. She publicly shamed a veteran for the size of his flag. She put liens on elderly homeowners who missed a single payment and treated appeals like theatrical performances where she was the judge and jury. People stopped calling her by name. The president became the shorthand for anyone who wanted to remind you that you weren't actually free in your own town. You could feel the tension sour the air. Neighbors who'd once exchanged apple pie recipes started avoiding one another on purpose. The farmer's market lost its laughter. Vendors whispered about permits that suddenly hadn't been filed. The diner's owner, Maria, who'd fed generations, had her renewal delayed twice on some new technicality. When she threatened to close, the town sat up and noticed. What finally broke the dam wasn't a single headline, it was a small, ugly letter. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd lived on Maple Street for 45 years, received a violation notice that read, excessive yard ornamentation contributing to decreased property values. Remove within 7 days or be fined. She had a single metal windmill the kids loved. The letter came printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by the president with a flourish. That night, folks gathered at her fence. She cried. We stewed. The first real meeting was a wash-in hour of people trying to speak while the president read from a prepared script and 2 security guards fanned out like sentries. Someone tried to speak up. She was cut off by a shouted order. The microphone was turned off. It felt like a show, and the audience got tired of being watched. The town had patience until it didn't. So we did what small towns do best. We organized. A Facebook group went viral overnight. A few neighbors, young business owners, retired teachers, a pastor with a thunderous voice, started collecting stories, receipts, and photographs. We printed flyers. We knocked on doors. We helped people file formal complaints. The energy that had been simmering became purpose. What had been individual frustrations became a shared grievance. And shared grievance is a dangerous thing for someone who thinks control is a right. It was the food truck that lit the fuse. The owner, Jamal, had made a living feeding late-night shifts in football crowds. One Friday, the president threatened to revoke his license for a sign she deemed non-compliant and insisted he move to the industrial park 2 towns away. Jamal ignored her first notice. He was tired of the harassment. The second notice came with a tow threat. The town showed up in force. People parked in front of the truck, folding chairs popped up, and someone started a playlist. The president called the sheriff. The sheriff met 1,000 neighbors and called it a peaceful demonstration. He didn't tow a single wheel. That moment changed everything. The town had seen the president's power play for what it was. Bullying with paperwork, the mayor, who'd been quietly watching, decided to act. An emergency council meeting was convened. The county attorney quietly joined, and for the first time, official scrutiny followed the murmurs. The attorney told us the paperwork was thin. The fines were often issued without proper notice. Procedures had been bypassed. Conflicts of interest had not been disclosed. The president had spent HOA funds. She'd signed contracts that benefited relatives, and she'd ignored bylaws when it suited her. Evidence went from anecdote to fact fast. Photographs of tampered applications. Bank records showing check payments to a business owned by a board member's sibling. Witness testimony from a landscaper who'd been paid twice, once by the HOA, once by the board president, directly appeared like dominoes falling. The local paper ran an editorial. A state inspector opened a formal investigation. The president's phone started ringing with questions she hadn't been trained to dodge. Now the town that had once nodded and smiled at the president's clipped proclamations was showing up at hearings, armed with not just anger but documentation. Mrs. Alvarez's windmill became Exhibit A. Jamal's food truck moved in with a ribbon of neighbors protecting it from citation vehicles. The high school coach who'd been fined for an unauthorized charity game produced receipts that made the president's accounting look laughable. The farmer, who'd been charged for an unapproved sign, had neighbors vouch for him at a hearing. We turned our small town's everyday transactions into a mosaic of proof. The meeting where everything fell apart didn't feel cinematic at first, just bureaucratic. But when the county auditor presented the ledger, you could hear the air leave the room. The president's face, which had always been the color of polished veneer, finally paled. The auditor explained that funds had been misallocated, procedures ignored, and homeowners' rights trammeled. The board's motions had no quorum in the months certain fines were levied. Several board members pleaded ignorance. A few looked guilty. The cameras on phones recorded everything. Within days, the president was suspended. Criminal investigations were announced. The HOA board, once a fortress, fell into chaos. Homeowners demanded transparency, new elections, and an audit accessible to anyone who wanted it. The mayor promised oversight. The county attorney promised prosecution if evidence warranted it, and the sheriff promised to keep the peace. But what the president hadn't counted on was the power of community. No subpoena needed, just people refusing to be bullied. We celebrated in ordinary ways. A block party filled the street the very next weekend, the same street where Mrs. Alvarez's windmill spun proudly in the breeze. Jamal cooked until the grills grew cold. Kids painted signs that said, "Our town, our rules," and the high school band played a march that sounded, for the first time in years, like it belonged to everyone. The farmer's stand sold out of tomatoes. Neighbors hugged, traded recipes, and laughed about how terrified the president looked when she finally had to answer for her actions. But this wasn't just theater, there were consequences. The president faced civil suits and a possible criminal case for misuse of funds and felony extortion. Related to threats of liens and falsified notices, the board was reconstituted with people who cared about bylaws and fairness, not power trips. The county instituted mandatory transparency workshops for every HOA within its jurisdiction. That's the thing about small towns. You fix a problem publicly. In other towns, watch and learn. The final image that stayed with me wasn't the courtroom or the headlines. It was simpler. Mrs. Alvarez, with her windmill, sitting on her stoop and waving at passing cars. People waved back. A month earlier, a man in a suit would have passed and pretended not to notice. Now he stopped, asked how she was, and helped her carry in groceries. The HOA president had gone too far. She had mistaken rules for ownership and paperwork for obedience. The whole town decided that wasn't how our community worked. They showed up, they spoke up, and they took back what had been quietly stolen from them: dignity, fairness, and the right to live without fear of arbitrary power. We still have an HOA here, but it's different now. Transparent meetings, audited finances, limits on how fines are issued, and neighborhood oversight committees made up of ordinary people. The president, who thought she owned the town, now owns the consequences of her choices. And when people ask me what changed, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the best law is community, and sometimes the loudest voice is the one that comes from hundreds of neighbors refusing to be silenced.